Hi, I'm Heather Popinchak from Polymath Park, and you're listening to US Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to US Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Today, host George Smart does his first ever walk and talk with architect Paul Broches as they visit the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Four Freedoms Park in New York City. And now, your host, recently named least valuable player in Fortnite, George Smart. George?
Hi, folks. Yes, I can land on the island with my big axe. But it only takes a few minutes to die a horrible virtual death at the hands of some mumbling 14-year-old from Bulgaria who has an automatic weapon. Fortnite, however, it is the Pac-Man of 2019. It's a thing. Another thing that was big back in the day, not too long ago, was the TV show West Wing with Martin Sheen.
Oh, yeah, President
Bartlett.
Bartlett, that's right.
It was about how things work inside the White House with a fictional president, played by Sheen, serviced by a large staff who run the country all day and squabble with each other. The award-winning writer and producer Aaron Sorkin frequently used a technique now known as the walk and talk. It's where people have a conversation while walking somewhere.
Oh, that's right.
If you want to get fancy, advanced walk and talk involves a third party joining the first two, and we'll get to that in a minute. Support for US Modernist Radio comes from Realtor Angela Roll.
In our continuing world of make-believe, modernist realtor Angela Roll was raised on a secluded modernist island in the Amazon, populated only by immortal warrior women with impeccable taste.
Same product.
When architect Le Corbusier crashes his plane into this paradise, Princess Diana is too busy teaching a SoulCycle class and sends Angela to deal with the French bespectacled architect. Le Corbusier, after ranting in French about how Americans have no style,
Mon Dieu,
encourages Angela to leave the all-female sanctuary to enter the cynical world of gabled roofs and men for the first time. Ever since, on a mission to defend modernism, Angela deals with unreasonable sellers, unrealistic buyers, incompetent builders, and bureaucratic city councils, while hoping to unlock the potential superpower of modernism that the world has yet to fully appreciate. Modernist realtor Angela Roll is your superheroine. Reach her at angelaroll.com, that's ROEHL, or 919-995-0550. Louis Kahn was one of the most brilliant and enigmatic architects of the 20th century. He died in 1974. There's a stirring and intelligent movie about his life called My Architect, produced by his son, which you should be watching soon. It's on most of the streaming services. Kahn taught at Yale and the University of Pennsylvania most of his career. He didn't do a lot of buildings, but he was famous for almost all of them, plus many fascinating unbuilt projects. One of those unbuilt projects was a memorial to Franklin Delano Roosevelt on Roosevelt Island in New York City. It was on the drawing boards when Kahn died. The project languished for decades and wasn't finished until 2012. The architecture firm Mitchell Giurgola in New York ultimately took Kahn's design and faithfully executed it to much international acclaim. I have wanted to go there ever since it opened, and in this episode, I do a walk and talk with Paul Broches, the Mitchell Giurgola partner in charge of the Four Freedoms Project. We met at the tram station on the east side, right near the Queensboro Bridge. After a while, our walk and talk moved up from basic to advanced. There used to be a trolley line here that'd take us across the bridge.
Yeah, it was before my time, but I gather that was the case, and this is a much more exciting way to go, I think.
This trolley was, this gondola, I guess, tram, they call it, was built in the late 70s, and the F-stop on the subway was built in the late 80s.
Yeah,
which was a big deal.
I'm surprised to hear that it was that late. Roosevelt Island, was formerly penal colony and an
welfare
asylum, welfare island, and it was called Blackwell Island before then. So it had a lot of difficult history to overcome. And in the late 60s, it was sort of a pretty inspired idea to begin to change that and to create housing. And it was mainly publicly subsidized housing.
And hospitals?
Well, the hospitals, there were hospitals that are gradually being decommissioned.
Okay.
And so we'll see the smallpox hospital, because that's sort of the point of departure for the memorial.
Yeah.
But there was another hospital before that, and then there was the north end of the island, several hospitals, little bits of which were beautiful and sort of historical remnants that have been retained. But around, those are now all gone.
Okay.
So it's now really about housing and community life, and there's never been a critical mass enough to create much commerce there, so that was a difficulty. Not a terrible grocery store, no restaurants, but now with the Cornell Tech campus, all of that's changing.
When did Cornell move in?
About a year ago.
Wow.
And you'll see there's still buildings under construction, and so this is really very new. And they started bringing the Cornell students to the city a few years ago so they could build up the program and lease space in Manhattan. But now it's all moved onto the island, and it's pretty exciting.
All the guidebooks for the Roosevelt Island Tramway talk about how this is the best view of New York, and I can see why they say that as we start to head towards the river and cross, particularly on this beautiful, sunny, cool day.
Yeah, no, it's really quite amazing. Yeah, each time I take it, I become kind of quiet because it's awe-inspiring and awesome.
When you were working...
This is also a very beautiful bridge.
Yes.
This is designed by Hornbostel,
okay,
who designed the Emory University campus, which is, I don't know if you've ever been to Emory, but
no.
It's a sort of a slightly post-neoclassical campus and extraordinarily beautiful. And so this is an architect-designed bridge. Not too
many of those?
Not too many of those. So if you look to the south, so now you see the Four Freedoms Park, the very southern tip, and the Cornell campus is right in front of us, off to the right. And then between it is South Point Park. And what's also amazing is that this river is still used for industry. So it's a connection from Long Island Sound to the Atlantic. So you see a fair amount of freight traffic here. And then now, of course, ferries are now a big deal for transportation in New York. So it's all a buzz. And this is also an amazing, it's a tidal river. Actually, it's not really a river. It's a tidal connection between these two seas. And it has an enormous amount of current. And it has a huge tidal change. And the tidal change ranges from 2 to 5 feet, which has a big impact on our project, in fact,
sure,
and how to deal with that. And you'll see that there's a lot of riprap along the side of along the edges of the memorial in order to absorb that tidal change. So it has a big impact on architecture. You can see the seawall here, and some of the riprap was put in the 19th century, and then they gradually reinforced the seawall.
Here on the island, were the original goals of providing lower-income housing, affordable housing, that's still true today, or has it become more gentrified?
It has become more gentrified. There was a lot, both Mitchell and Section 8, and pretty much every program, and most of those still exist. But the new housing, which this is one of them, these have actually been built by the university, so we should have looked back at Rockefeller University, but there's Rockefeller University and Cornell and Memorial Sloan Kettering. They all have huge staffs, and attracting good people to New York City is always a huge problem with the cost of housing. So they started building over here. So I can't remember. I think this is a Cornell finance project, and Rockefeller is in one, and so that they can subsidize housing for their staff. So that's also beginning to increase the population and make it more diverse, and so it's getting much more interesting to be here.
We are slowly coasting into the terminus of the tramway, and in a second we're going to start the walk down to the park.
Yeah, it'll be about a 10-minute walk, and in the springtime it's a line of cherry blossoms, an alley of cherry blossoms along the river edge, which is a beautiful way to start the procession into the park.
You know, I've talked to several people about Four Freedoms Park, and they all kind of heard about it and kind of know it, but they haven't really made the effort to come over here yet and see it themselves.
Yeah, it's surprising that that's still the case, but we did have the millionth visitor last week.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
So it's not totally unknown. And a lot of school trips come, and it now changed from being involved with construction to being more involved with user experience and promoting the place. And so it's getting more publicity. It's generally on the Open House New York tours, and I see a lot of tourists coming, foreigners, who get pretty excited about the tram. They like to look back at Manhattan from along the East River here. So I think it's picking up. If you look up to the right there, that's Rockefeller University, where we designed about a $300 million project to rehouse a third of the scientists.
Oh.
And the piece that you see now, it's running over the FDR Drive. That's a 900-foot-long research building that Raphael Vignoli's office designed, and ours is behind it. You can't really see it from here. So there continues to be a lot of work along the river's edge, and in making that project, to get the right to build over the highway, they had to provide a park along the river's edge. So where you see all that vegetation is the beginning of a continuous ribbon of park along the river. So you'll be able to run from there all the way down to the lower end of Manhattan as they continue to build this waterfront.
This viewpoint from here is really quite amazing and different from what I've ever seen just walking around main Manhattan Island.
It's really striking, and I think a lot of it is about what the future of New York needs to be in terms of sort of engagement with technology and employment of all of our resources to make the world a better place. So Rockefeller University is these southern buildings, that long one, then New York Hospital, Cornell Weill Medical Center is up above that. Memorial Sloan Kettering is that strange curvy building beyond. So this is one of the biggest tech centers, medical tech centers in the world.
Yeah, there's several major hospitals along that stretch.
Yeah. You can see what's happening here. So this is not part of the happy story, but the beginning, this pylon is beginning to corrode.
Uh-oh.
And they'll just keep looking at that and saying, uh-oh. And they keep putting more cell tower equipment on here. So it's become so valuable that they'll get stuck with, how do we change this? How do we fix this? How do we replace it? And so this is now nearly 40 years old, and they have to get serious about it. This is just another example of infrastructure crisis.
Well, what's the lifespan of a structure like this? I would think it would be more than 40 years, even with a little corrosion.
Yeah, well, this one has been here since, I think, 1918 or something like that. Yes, so that is true. But you still have to attend to it, and they repaint this bridge frequently.
Oh, they do? Okay.
I don't know if they've ever done anything with this pylon.
We're walking past what's probably a tennis court bubble?
It is.
Okay.
It is. This is a rec center that is both public and private. So they're courts that people have memberships to, but public has access to them as well. And there's a pretty large gym here and basketball courts. And a lot of my friends come over across the bridge to play tennis here because the resources for tennis are not so many in New York as you can imagine.
I bet, yeah.
But this is a great one. And now the UN is coming into view. And so the site of the FDR Four Freedoms Park and it being immediately across the river from the UN is no accident. And I think the people who came up with the idea, it was not Kahn who invented this site. It was a group of urban designers working in the city in a very inspired time during the Lindsay administration. So some of those people who came up with the concept are still here, and they're so amazed that it actually was realized.
That seems to be the predominant theme, is that everybody's amazed it was actually realized and that people persevered for 40 years?
That's right. And since we were there pretty much from the beginning, it was always this kind of up and down process was somewhat frustrating because it never seemed like it was actually going to get there. And then finally, around 2007, actually it was 2005, there was an exhibition which was sponsored by Cooper Union, the architecture school. And it was beautifully done. Had a lot of the original drawings by Kahn. Had the first set of working drawings that we had produced up on the wall. People were amazed to see working drawings done in pencil. And they would come look, oh my God, look, this pencil drawings. And that sort of stirred up interest. And that was the beginning of really getting traction around the notion that this could really happen.
When you found the site, what was there? What was the condition when you finally got to start on this?
Well, you really have to start way before then. So
okay.
When we get to the smallpox hospital, 20 feet south of the smallpox hospital was the end of the island. And from about 1950 to 1975, they were building the F train tunnel, and all the spoils that came out of the tunnel rock removal were dumped at the south end of the island. So when you see photographs, which we have, you see how the island is growing, and it's all made up of scarified rock, which is an amazing material to create a foundation for something in the future. So no one really had an idea of what that might be, but the island kept growing. So when we started coming out here in the early 70s, it was basically just the spoils from the excavation that were piling up going south, and with no particular sense of order or purpose. Then in the early 1990s, I mentioned the seawall around the island. There was a contract out to rebuild the seawall. And the site civil firm that did the design, when they got to the south end, someone on the Roosevelt Island staff said, wait a minute, there's an idea for a memorial. Let's alter the seawall at the south end so the land comes down into the water. Because that was Louis Kahn's idea.
Yeah.
That was a huge sort of acknowledgement or recognition of the design. And the woman who made that, she was the planning director, who made that suggestion, is a heroine to these days. And then...
What's her name? Do you remember?
Alice Russo.
Alice Russo, okay. Thank you, Alice.
Yes, thank you, Alice.
Big shout out to Alice.
Absolutely. And then the other idea she had, which took it further, was there was a little bit of money left from the design and work on the seawall, like $200,000 or something like that. She said, we're going to invest that in regrading the southern tip. Let's see if we can make it look like the memorial wants to look like. So it was regraded so that it has the same topography that the final monument has. So people could begin to imagine what it would look like. So to your question, it looked like nothing. But when Alice got through with it, already began to look, the earth form was very akin to what the ultimate design would be.
So it came down to a point, like it does now?
Came down to a point, and what they did was to berm up the soil at the north end, because you go up this monumental set of stairs now. And so they graded it up so you walk up this hill, and then you go down towards the point, just as we're going to experience in a few minutes. Here we are with the geese.
Yes, hello geese. They're leaving their usual gifts for us.
They are. And of course they love it even more now that they know that it's the democratic spirit of FDR that brings all of us here.
So you said that there were 1 million people clocked in as of this last weekend?
That's right.
How do they know? Are we all scanned as we go into the park?
Yes, they use a hand clicker.
Oh, they do?
You'll probably see the clickerette who's there. They're very focused on knowing what the numbers are and what time of day they come and what time of year they come.
Did the millionth person win a coffee mug or anything? Do you know?
I asked the same question. I think they kind of missed the boat on that.
Yeah.
They weren't looking at the clickers.
I'm just astonished at these views back across the river to Manhattan. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of photos of this in places, but they're not the ones you typically see when New York is featured.
No, it's you don't. And it's the dynamic city. And when you see the layers of the buildings going back from the river, the geometries change, the materials change. You get a sense of time. Just looking straight ahead of us is the U.S. mission to the UN, that white concrete building.
That's a Guatemala building?
It is.
That was one of Charlie's last ones, wasn't it? Or was it after he passed away?
No, he was still alive. And as you know, the UN has recently been renovated, totally reclad, and totally faithful to the original design, beautifully executed.
I'm always inspired when I come to New York by the United Nations building. Not just the architecture, but the goals of the organization and the way there was a lot of optimism about its creation and that we were going to be a better world at some point, more together. And then I go over there, and I have to admit, some of the criticisms about the United Nations are kind of obvious, like they've got the guy who's the elevator operator in the elevator that clearly doesn't need any operator, just taking a job and filling staff, and that's little minor stuff. But, I think New York has lost some of that optimism that it used to have about the future.
I think that has been growing over the last 20 to 30 years and obviously has reached a peak of discouragement during this administration, if we can go there. No, it's very sad. When I look at it, I see it as somewhat of a remembrance of things past, but it's still the fact that they actually were able to rebuild it exactly as it had been designed by the amazing architects who worked on it. It gives me a sense that because buildings symbolize so many things, and the support that it was given was so phenomenal, that I see it as a sign of hope.
Was it the Rockefellers' property, I think, originally that they donated for this?
Sounds right. I can't confirm it.
We'll have to Google that, folks, but that's what we're going to go for now.
So here we are, coming to the smallpox hospital, and it's amazing that this is a landmark to be preserved forever. And as you can see, we were talking about infrastructure. It has not been given the greatest amount of attention. And over the years, the walls were gradually beginning to crumble in. The last one was 3 or 4 years ago in a snowstorm. This entire north facade beyond that steel support just fell in. But everyone loves it. It's a sort of a fantasy place. You can make up your own story about it. The notion of smallpox is not necessarily inspiring, but it has a mystery that I think keeps us engaged. So
this looks like a perfect location for a Screamer movie, right?
It probably was. Until about 10 years ago, you could do a Screamer movie in here. Now it's a little bit beyond the pale. So this was designed by James Renwick, who did the Patent Office in Washington and the Smithsonian Building. So it has a pretty august history. And the Pratt Architecture School periodically has a project to imagine the adaptive reuse of this to other purposes. And sometimes I sit on their juries, and I always like the students who don't want to give it a real purpose. Some people, they want to turn it into a visitor center, which is the most horrific idea in the world. And then others just want to somehow restore it in a way that, as a restored ruin, which is very common in Europe.
Oh, sure. I immediately thought of cathedrals that I've seen.
Yeah.
Like bombed out cathedrals in England.
and you try and preserve it in a way that the history is still there, the imagination is still at work, and then you can sort of let your imagination take you to another place. And sometimes the students do that, not enough of them do that.
We're approaching the gate of the Franklin D. Roosevelt Four Freedoms Park.
A very modest gate.
I'm looking for the clicker. Where's the clicker?
She's probably there. It's pretty cold in here to be outside, so in the summertime she would be right at the door. Today she is a he, and I'm sure he's clicking. Yep, see, there it goes. We want to see your clicker, because we know that fairly recently the millionth visitor came through. Were you here when the millionth click?
One of the few days that I'm off from the park.
Oh.
So my clicker has 10 for today.
I see.
Multiply that by a lot and you'll get to a million. How many? To the exponential power.
Did the millionth person win a coffee mug or anything while they were here?
I don't know if there was a prize. I mean, they got to enjoy this beautiful memorial. That should be prize enough, right?
There you go.
But actually, Jason Wang, one of our assistant managers here at the park, who should be towards the back if you walk there, I think he was here up front when the million visitors came through our doors.
Okay.
So actually, I worked on the design of the park with Mitchell Giurgola Architects. So I have a long history with it. And Howard, the other day, I was on the phone with him, and he said, "Oh yeah, millionth visitor. We're on a roll."
Yeah, it's a great milestone for the park, and there's great history here besides the aesthetics. So
yeah, it's great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So for Louis Kahn, his architecture has a very strong foundation, the sense of procession and the sense of movement through space and introduction to usually a pretty profound concept for what the building is about or the park is about. And so as we come here, we immediately are faced with this large stair. And by the way, first we're walking by copper beaches, and these 5 copper beaches are like a veil that sort of begin to introduce you, so it's not immediately that stair is revealed somewhat gently. And I think every step that we take was considered by Kahn. There are no accidents here. This is very purposeful.
I visited his Salk Institute, which has been compared to this in some ways, and it's also magical.
Yeah.
The procession part.
The procession part and how you gradually become engaged in it. Well, I hope you will. I think you will. And so it begins to take you in, and it takes you in, and of course we're going to go through it chatting with one another, but if you were alone, I think you would begin to sort of be captivated by the spiritual content that is here. That's hard to explain. It's hard to explain exactly why it works that way, but Kahn really refers everything back to primordial architecture, so it goes back to Egypt and before Egypt, and I think you feel all of that. So it's a monument, but a monument from that kind of reference is not monumental in the usual sense. It's monumental in kind of an emotional and intellectual sense.
I can't remember in the movie that his son Nathaniel made if there was any mention of this park. That would have been, 2006 or so?
There was a very brief mention, but because it was well before construction. And even at a moment when people wondered, is this really ever going to happen? This is a great time of year to be here because it's cold, it's crisp, but the leaves are still on the trees.
So we're at the top of the stairs now, looking south. We can see that there's something down there at the end. We're going to discover that in a minute.
I think it's actually a service vehicle.
Okay.
But behind the service vehicle is a 4-foot-high head of FDR. And I think now we're on axis, and then you see him here. And that head was originally a sculpture by a fairly well-known sculptor, Joe Davidson, and it was exact size of a human head.
So we're shifting a little bit from... This is granite or marble we're walking on?
It's all granite.
All granite.
It's a white Mount Airy granite.
From Mount Airy, North Carolina, Mayberry granite.
You got it. Andy Griffith land.
So, how many tons? I read like 1,000 tons, 1,000,000 tons.
Yeah.
How many?
I think it's several thousand tons. I think the interesting thing, one of my favorite experiences in this project was trying to find the right granite. The Kahn had specified 3 different granites, all coming from the Appalachian Range. The Appalachian Range starts in Georgia and
goes all the way up
to Quebec.
Yeah.
And the 2 favorites were Mount Airy in North Carolina and the Quebec from Saint Sebastian, Quebec. So the Mount Airy was particularly valued because it's an open-face quarry. It's actually the biggest open-face quarry in the world for granite. And the one in Canada is a very deep mine. So I went to look at the one in Canada and with a couple of my colleagues and a few engineers, and we had to go from Montreal in a helicopter up to Saint Sebastian in February in the snow. This was not a good thing. Small helicopter. And the snow kept getting worse as we were flying up, we thought, flying north. No instruments on this helicopter. Turns out we're flying east. So we're now flying over New Hampshire and Maine. And one of the engineers who's pretty knowledgeable is looking down, because we're flying very low, looking down, he says, that's not the way we do logging in Canada. I think we're in New Hampshire. And then everyone says, holy, now what? So, just with the compass, we start flying north and sort of west again to get to Saint Sebastian. And I think it was probably one of my scariest moments of my life.
A little unscheduled diversion to New Hampshire.
Yeah. So even the crushed gravel is the same granite. And
so we've shifted now to this crushed gravel surface, which upon first glance doesn't even look like a walkway.
That's right. So this comes from the pulverized gravel parks in Paris, basically. This is really where this first became a favorite. And it's now become more common in this country. There are lots of questions about it always, whether people who are in wheelchairs can really navigate through this. And we have spent months and months doing demonstrations and how pulverized the granite really has to be, and whether you have to make it adhere to the ground so you can't slip on it. And eventually they understood that this is really the right thing, and it looks very beautiful and it wears nicely. And you can also see now how this alley of trees has created this wonderful cover. So we feel like we're walking through a light, dappled, spiritual place.
I really can't believe the view. This is just astonishing. I mean, I had an inkling it might be like this from looking at the Google Maps and the aerial photos and, of course, all the different photography that's been done of this place. But to actually be here is just astonishing.
It is astonishing. So it has both the quality of being a very insular, private experience, and then it's in this world. We're just surrounded by millions of people, and it has a generosity of spirit that's really quite special. And then during Fashion Week, they use this as a runway. And then
really?
Then it becomes totally bizarre. I don't know if they did it this year, but I've come in with visitors like yourself, and you see all these amazing-looking people dressed to the nines in crazy clothing, marching through here and going back to the other side, and all of it being filmed. So it's used in many different ways.
Well, I remember what hit the national press was there was a rally for Hillary Clinton here. There was either like a kickoff or something like that. What other kind of big events have been here?
Well, the opening was pretty amazing. Bill Clinton spoke. You had the mayor. You had Cuomo. You had sort of every major elected official. There was Bloomberg at the time. Major public figures, and they were all sort of in a dais here. So as you looked, and this was hundreds of people. So that was amazing. The Tisch family, the real estate family, they had a wedding here. And the wedding was where, between the stair and the smallpox hospital, they'd put up a huge tent. And then the Four Freedoms Park Conservancy was very clever. They planned to have their gala fundraiser the next day so they could use the Tisch tent. And so very efficient, right? So that was quite amazing. We were there, actually, for the Tisch event, and it was phenomenal to be in a space like this for a ceremony, a wedding, wonderful wedding, positive kind of ceremony. Sally Menard, who was on the board of the Four Freedoms Park Conservancy and was the president of the Conservancy for a while, was a very strong supporter of Hillary. So I think it was her idea that this would be a great place for a kickoff. There you see a very odd little building, looks like Swiss cheese, over to the left.
Yes.
That's a Queens Branch Library designed by Stephen Hull. And it's not quite complete. So now we're in what's called the forecourt. So Kahn's idea was, he said, I think when I thought of this, I thought of a garden and a room. The garden is the place, the beginning, like the Garden of Eden. And the room is the beginning of architecture. And that was it. And he said the rest will just happen. So the garden and the room.
Well, he was always very mystical. I mean, when he started to talk about the brick and,
right.
and other things like that, he was more of a prophet in that way.
Yeah, he was. And a prophet who brought things to reality. And I think this slope, by the way, if you stand here, the most amazing thing happens when we stand here. I'm sorry this little vehicle is in the way. What looked like a very strong sort of perspectival diminishment makes the space look smaller. When you look at this in this direction, if we step back a little bit, it almost looks rectangular. So it was a triangle from the other side, it becomes almost a rectangle from this side. So these geometries play with us. We think they're all absolute. They're not. So
We've changed surfaces again.
We've changed surface, yes. So we've gone from the garden into what's called the forecourt. And in the warmer seasons, there are chairs underneath these trees. And that leads us, so the procession is now getting focused on now FDR as we look at this. It's called sort of a gargantuan. The idea of this big head really comes from the monumental sculptures done in the Pacific primitive tribes. And everyone thought that this might be the right answer, and I think it's quite beautiful. So this is actually, it's bronze. It weighs 1,000 pounds, and it's floating in this niche. We wonder how it can do that. FDR was a magical guy.
Yeah. So
there's actually a steel beam in there that's...
Well, I thought it might be like anti-gravity or lasers or something like that.
Yeah, right. An invisible winch. So now we're looking at the room. Let's go into the room.
Okay.
So we pass this sort of centerpiece. We walk into the room, and I think at this point, now the scale changes dramatically. While these are huge stones, and each one of them weighs about 35 tons, it's an intimate room. And it becomes quite quiet, and your focus is to the open air and to the ocean and to the great beyond. And I think that's when we all become kind of quiet.
This is really surreal. You listeners have got to put this on your list to get out here.
And then if we turn around, so it's called the Four Freedoms Park, and this is an excerpt from the Four Freedoms speech that Roosevelt gave in 1941. And this was sort of the beginning of trying to get people more comfortable is the wrong word, but more accepting of the idea of going to war and the importance that we look forward to a world founded upon essential human freedoms.
So in case you're curious about what the Four Freedoms are, let's review. I'll just crib from the sculpture here. The first is the freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want everywhere in the world. And the fourth is freedom from fear, anywhere in the world. That is no vision of a distant millennium. It is a definite basis for a kind of world attainable in our own time and generation. Very optimistic and future-looking.
And what a great time to be reminding ourselves of that potential.
So ahead of us is Youthant Island,
yes,
little bird sanctuary.
So the second one is the Youthant Island. The first one is really about the birds. But it shows this is Manhattan schist, what we call Manhattan schist. And that's what this end of the island is founded on. So we've just walked, when we came to the stair, we've now walked about 750 feet. And many things have happened. We climbed a stair. We came to kind of a high point. We looked down towards the room. We see the city all around us, and then we kind of descend into the room. And then we have this peaceful 28 6-foot by 6-foot by 12-foot columns of stone. And if you look between them, you can sight between them. There's a 1-inch gap.
Oh, wow.
And the side of the stone that's going back is actually, it's not polished, it's kind of a honed finish, so it reflects the light. And this is a saw-cut finish. So the answer to your question about how do you get this stuff out of the mine, basically you get it out of the mine in very rough, large hunks. And in an open-face mine, it's relatively simple to do it because you have 20 or 30 acres of flat surface that you're digging into.
Do they blast it out? Do they saw it out?
They do all of the above. It depends on the condition and the size of the pieces they need. So they in this case, they were running drills around. So if you see the stone coming out, it actually has all these sort of semi-cylindrical holes, which is how they release the stone from the mass. They lift it out, and then in Mount Airy, they actually do all the stone carving there. If we had gone with the Quebec stone, they would have to ship these big blocks to another place. But in Mount Airy, they then move it over to a place where they use huge saws. Big, it's like a table saw.
Yeah,
except
giant.
It's now giant. And Kahn's specification was to leave everything in the raw finish of the material that cut it. So this is a saw-cut finish, and the saw is so... You can see on that stone, depending on how the light hits it, you can actually see the rotation on the face of these lines that are going in a very slight arc.
Lines?
That's the saw lines.
That's a big saw.
It's a big saw. It's like
Holy
a 10 foot diameter
Easily
saw.
a giant saw.
Yeah. So these are sitting on a moving cart as they go through the stone. Sometimes moves through this saw, or the saw moves through the stone, depending on the direction.
Who knew? Because in Andy Grove, they never talked about stone.
And Maybury and that famous coffee shop is like a stone's throw away. Yeah, who knew? So, but now they weigh 36 tons. They're down in Mount Airy, North Carolina. So they're actually 190 stones of roughly this size, but most of them are being used for the foundations. These 28 came by truck. Each one was on a truck. It went to Port Elizabeth, New Jersey, where it was put onto a barge. Because there's one bridge that comes across to the island, and it's not designed for 36-ton anything. So the big stones that weighed 36 tons came up the river on a barge, and it was the most amazing sight. Early in the morning, they came up, and they could put about 4 stones on a barge. So these things were coming up, like every day there would be 2 or 3 of them. There was a crane, a 300-ton crane that was sitting in the water that would lift. It's one of the biggest tons of cranes anywhere, and it would lift the stones up and then put them down into a sand pit. Because how do you put a perfectly carved, this is now the finished stone.
Yeah.
If you don't put it down right, it'll just break apart. So they made a sand pit, which is what the Egyptians did. They would carve the stones and they would roll them around in the sand in order to work on them. And then they would put them on the carts and roll them up onto the pyramids. And the same technology.
So you were offloading them by crane. You didn't have to build a special dock for things to roll up on here.
No. Well, the crane, but actually the crane is on a barge too.
Okay.
So that had to be stabilized. So in effect, they had to build a sort of a foundation for the crane while it was there. And so it was just we have the most amazing photographs. It's hard to have this talk without the images. And so we're trying to paint
magic of podcasting.
Yeah. So this experience of watching these things land was so beautiful, so poetic, even though they're huge. And all the guys, the stonemasons, this was a time of their life. They'd never had the same experience. They knew that they were doing something similar to the Egyptians, but now they were really doing the same thing as the Egyptians. And we kept coming. We were out on the site every day watching this because everyone was having such a good time, even though it was extremely complicated, and the precision with which these had to be placed. And Louis Kahn's totally merciless idea of accuracy. The drawings were designed with the tolerances of a 1/16 of an inch, which is impossible. So we increased it to an 1/8. But it was still...
You lazy bastards.
That's right. We wanted to make it easier on everybody. Let's make it realistic. So, and they did it. They managed to do it with that tolerance. So these joints are all, they're 3/8 of an inch, which is also incredible. These stones weigh, thousands of pounds. We're talking about the paving stones now. This paving is actually all open, and there's a drain down below it, so the water drains straight out into the river.
Okay.
So our firm, Mitchell Giurgola, is very lucky because we've done a lot of work along the East River. So I mentioned Rockefeller University, which is behind us. And then there's a sort of a blonde building with green glass that's slightly pitched off to one side. So that's a research building at NYU Medical Center that we did in the mid-2000s. And then you see this crazy building that's going up like this. It's an apartment building that has a bridge connecting two towers.
Yes.
So we didn't design that building. But down at the bottom, you see a little red brick thing hovering down there. So that's an elementary school, and we designed that, and that was completed a couple of years ago. And when we designed it, the expectation was that Richard Meyer would design those two towers. And, of course, they would have been totally all white. So we thought, well, for a school for children, we should do something rich and lively. So it's red, white, and blue, and it's very bright and fun, and it's like a little Lego block sitting underneath these two white towers. But the two white towers didn't happen. We got these. This is Shop who designed these two, I guess, exciting buildings. And so it's a very alive riverfront.
I remember reading at some point, somebody went out to Youthant Island and took it over and planted a flag and wanted to proclaim their own nation. I don't think that lasted very long, but it would certainly be a cool place to do that.
It would. It was perfect. So when every year for the UN Assembly meetings, the Secret Service takes control over this site because they can watch what's going on in case the people from Youthant Island decided to attack the UN. They've protected here. So
the Youthant Island Army is a very merciless, I understand.
So you see now all these ferries, these are all commuter ferries. And it's amazing because we've had this waterfront for centuries and centuries, and for people to use for commuter traffic is very recent.
It's really great. I mean, how long has Europe been doing that successfully, and we're catching up now? Do you know the author Alan Hess?
Only by name.
Okay. He's written like 20 books, and every architecture documentary you've ever seen probably has Alan Hess in it.
Uh-huh.
I call him like the Samuel L. Jackson of architecture documentaries.
I don't know how I missed it, but
he's in all of them. He's in the new Frey film. He's in the ones about Lautner and Neutra and the Palm Springs architects. Really cool guy. I was at a book signing that he was at last night at the film.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Alan is everywhere. I mean, he's just like all over. He's based in California, but...
Does he live in a Lautner house? Or?
No, he doesn't. I think he would like to. Very, very much. Yeah. He's certainly been in a bunch of them.
Yeah, I bet. That's exciting. So here you see white granite. Why white granite? again, it has this kind of primordial presence, and you feel this. Sometimes stone looks like it could be plastic laminate, but there's no confusing this for the real things. You see the grain in it, you see the irregularities in it, and in the white stone, these things read through in this very sort of gentle way. And
I know you took care of things like the tide, but I imagine that even if this were underwater for a couple of generations, if it drained again, it would still be here. I mean, where's it going to go?
Well, a week after the opening, it was Superstorm Sandy. So, we like to design things for a 100-year storm. So, not to joke, but the idea here was this is going to be here for a generation. We're going for a 500-year building. So, a week later, we have that storm. The storm surges were 15 feet. The tide had already been 5 feet higher than it would normally be. So, it was almost totally underwater. We knew that the sea rise was happening. So, after a huge amount of discussion, it was agreed that we would raise all the elevations by 15 inches. It seemed like a huge amount. People said, no, 3 inches, no, 6 inches, because we don't want to change the relationship of you standing on the ground and looking into the water. And if we raise it too high, it'll all be different. And so 15 inches was agreed upon. Well, of course, within a few years, that will have meant nothing. So the water all ran away, and people were fine, but the trees did suffer because they had now taken in a lot of salt water directly into their roots.
How do you heal a tree from that kind of experience?
The tree has to take it on, and there's really not a lot you can do. And they did lose a few. And you can see there are two that are suffering here, and they've actually been. Those are the two. That location is where the ones were lost in the storm. And it was not due to the wind, it was really that salt water penetration. For some reason, every tree they put in there says, no, I don't want to be here. This is where my fellows
have fallen
before. Right. So,
do you have backup trees ready to go?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, and so it's been relatively seldom. I mean, it's kind of amazing that they're as strong as they are.
Wow, here he is. That's Alan Hess.
My God.
It's Alan Hess.
It's a small world.
I know. We were just talking about him.
All
what are the odds of this occurring?
I don't know. As I live and breathe, this is the most amazing thing happening to me this week.
All roads lead to the FDR.
Alan, meet Paul, one of your fans.
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Good. So you had a good.
Did you come down to this part?
I haven't been all the way down.
Come on, we'll go back down.
Let's do it.
I was stopped by this this bust of Roosevelt. It's so solemn. I mean, we always think of him grinning, but here he is so pensive, and it's striking. It is very striking.
So this is a head designed by sculptor Joe Davidson in the 1930s.
Oh, really?
And it was a normal-size head. It was 11 inches high.
From life, then?
From life. Yes, from life.
Yeah.
And Jock Reynolds, who was then, I'm not sure what he is now, he was the director of the Yale Art Museum. And so had been involved in a con building and had met con frequently and was trying to kind of make a connection between... So I'd mentioned to you earlier that con never really showed what should go in this niche.
Really?
There were sketches that showed kind of a ghost-like figure with a cape, which could have been Roosevelt, he wasn't standing up too much.
Yeah.
So after a lot of discussion, it was agreed that this would be a good idea to have this kind of supersized head. Because when you're up, I don't know if you noticed it from the top of the stair, or if you were even at the top of the stair.
Yeah, I did. I didn't know what it was from up there, but I see.
The size was partly determined by the fact that you were supposed to be able to tell what it was from the top of the stair. But
It was obviously a point of power. Everything was coming to this.
Yes, you wanted to be here.
Yeah.
You wanted to be here.
Yeah.
So now you're right. It is a solemn head.
Yeah.
And so it makes you wonder what was going on in his head when that sculpture was being developed.
Well, I got to say, I'm very moved by being here. Because, Roosevelt, who was always so optimistic in the worst of times for America, and here he is in the midst of all of the the money and the power and the building and everything here in the middle of New York, but to find this quiet, pensive place, but like Louis Kahn always kind of transcended things. He was just such a spiritual architect, really. So, no, it's powerful. It's very powerful.
And it's transformational when you come here, and I think it makes me actually kind of solemn, because I feel this sense of peace and tranquility, but of course when I look around me, that's not exactly what's happening.
Exactly.
And so it's a reminder to us of how it's up to us to figure out how to make this not just symbolic of, but to help us to actuate it.
Yeah. And they're the very simple geometry, simple forms, but which Kahn always made them possess such power.
And in fact, they're not quite as simple as you. I mean, the large form is very simple, but notice this wall. This wall is not straight. This wall has a slight kink in it.
Really?
And
yes.
And the wall, as it goes down the ramp, that wall also changes very slightly. And I started working on these drawings in 1974.
Really?
And
that was the year Kahn died.
That was the year he died. So we finished the working drawings after his death. And then New York went bankrupt, quiet for many years. And then in the 1990s, I was describing that they did the seawall project, and Alice Russo had this great idea, let's not put a seawall around here. Someday the park may happen. We redid the drawings. We put them on AutoCAD. So everyone said, okay, if we're going to redo the drawings, let's put them on AutoCAD. We had done them in pencil on Mylar. And so I had now redrawn them twice, and then we did it a third time in 2008 when it started looking real. We redid the drawings, and that's when we started doing all the engineering, because Kahn really hadn't himself fully understood or considered the issues of how do you hold this up or how do you hold it down. There was both issues. And so we did a lot of engineering work, and I never fully appreciated that these little kinks, I drew them, but never understood exactly why they're that way. We didn't, we were really on the mode of we're doing exactly what the man wanted because he was the man.
Yeah.
And only when it was actually being constructed, I began to fully appreciate how this minor little kink makes such a huge difference. And I don't know that we are so aware of it, but it's where the transcendent capacity he had to understand, to take something to another level.
Yeah.
And there are lots of little things in here that are not so simple, even though the overarching geometry is incredibly straightforward.
Yeah.
And it's that he takes things to all of this another level that you only appreciate when you experience the place.
Yeah. Did you meet Kahn and talk to him about this ever?
Well, when I was a student, so I went to Columbia, but Aldo Giurgola, who was sort of my mentor in Columbia, taught earlier with Kahn at Penn.
Yeah.
And so we would all go down to Penn to hear him talk in his graduate classes. And, you see photographs of Kahn kind of looking pensively up in the air. Well, he would go into that mode where, there are like 30 or 40 students sitting in a room with him, and not all of a sudden, he gradually would go into this kind of spiritual mode, and the words would come out, and you weren't totally clear what the hell he was saying. But you knew it was important.
Yes.
And you didn't take notes because it didn't make any sense to take notes. So a lot of it is that kind of memory of... And when you read the statements that he wrote or people wrote down for him, it's often you can't grab the words totally. You read them and you try to parse them, and it's just something about the way they roll off together that makes them so special.
So you had the experience of actually hearing it firsthand coming from his mouth. And that was probably what he intended, obviously.
Well, the design Kahn had for this location is so brilliant, but it should also be stated, because it's not quite really well recognized, how much of a role your firm, Paul, Mitchell Giurgola, had in this. I went to the Wikipedia page, and you're not really prominent there on the page, so we got to fix that. Some Wikipedia editor out there needs to go in and set this record straight.
Absolutely. We're kind of a modest firm, and ego isn't the our primary mover, so we kind of just let it go. But of course, it would be much nicer if it were appreciated. I think it's appreciated among the architecture community, and I think our firm has
no architects listen to this podcast, so the general public, they want to set the record straight.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think, the brilliance is all Kahn's, and our brilliance is getting the damn thing built, which was pretty amazing. I think the number of people I was describing, George, the stonemasons who worked on the project, essentially had to adopt the building practices from the Egyptians.
Really?
Because these huge blocks of stone were lifted off of a barge on a crane, which is a modern thing, but they had to be laid down into a sand pit, which is exactly what the Egyptians were doing.
So they're sitting under sand?
No, just to get them off the
boat,
off the air onto the ground, because they're so heavy. If they're not put down in a very gentle way,
they're going to break and get damaged.
Just break apart.
Yeah.
So things like that were very fundamental to an earlier time, and I think the Masons all felt elevated by the experience.
Yeah.
It was incredibly...
Well, speaking of Masons, I read some great stuff on the internet that this is a secret Masonic temple in some way.
I don't think so. Where'd you read that?
So
I missed that.
Yeah, you missed that?
Yeah, I did.
That you can supposedly take a dollar bill and use different elements of the dollar bill interlaid on the Four Freedoms Park to get some secret meaning about Roosevelt's involvement. I'm sure that if you know something about this, you can't tell us.
Was Roosevelt supposed to be a Mason?
Yeah.
Or was he part of the Illuminati? Well, I have a dollar bill here and got the pyramid. I don't know. I am feeling some vibrations in this at the moment. Yeah, so...
Oh, my Lord, helicopters are coming. They're after us.
We found them out.
Well, I'm sure everything is possible, but I'm going to stick with FDR and the Four Freedoms.
Okay.
Yeah, that's powerful enough. It really is.
And these 1-inch gaps, I'm not sure you've noticed them.
Yeah.
They're really pretty amazing. So you can think about this wall as a wall or as 28 columns, and I think that was part of the idea that it shouldn't feel entirely massive, but it should be massive. And it's a little bit like the kink in the wall, to have these slots.
Yeah.
Very special.
No. Well, that's what Kahn, you do look at his plans, and they are so carefully thought through down to the last detail, responding to one thing or another. And it's always something important, and maybe only he knew. But that's the brilliance of his architecture.
Yeah, so I don't know, it's not the secret of the Masons, but there was this alignment. So in the summer solstice, the sun on June 23rd maybe, it's not actually the 21st, the sun comes directly through, sort of normal to the slot. So it just makes this amazing shard of light.
For all of the...
yes, roughly, because the sun's pretty big. So it's probably only one that's getting it perfect.
Yeah, but...
The others are perfect enough.
So you know what that means, don't you?
That
means it's pointing to the secret entrance to something that we're standing on. Because in every movie, that's what the secret band of light means.
We need to get Nicolas Cage here to figure this
right,
out.
And Harrison Ford and the Temple of Doom.
Okay, whatever.
Well, the Four Freedoms Park is accessible on the F train or the lovely Roosevelt Island tram. Make sure to make it part of your next New York trip.
Thanks for listening. US Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special agent for modernist houses, 919-995-0550. Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows and access 2.3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. US Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Guest researcher Cindy Stratton has changed her name again and does not want any more fan letters.
No.
I'll make a note of that. US Modernist Radio is a production of Triangle Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational organization for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back next week with another walkin', talkin', moving to the groovin'.
And just when it hit me, somebody turned around
and said, "This is U.S. Modernist Radio."